Welcome everybody. We are going to start this tutorial day now. Maybe a few more people are going to come in, maybe there's going to be a few more technical things happening, but otherwise we should be fine to go. Okay, so I see many unfamiliar faces, which is great. So this tutorial day we have been doing at SMWCons for a few times now, usually in combination with a hacking day as a developers meeting. And the general idea of this type of event in front of the conference, ahead of the conference, is to have a more kind of workshop seminar style introduction to various topics, which ideally allows you to learn things about problems you encountered with using software like this, or maybe even if you're completely new to the system, to learn what you can do with it, if you should use it, how you should use it, and so on. So the general idea of this day is not to necessarily give lectures here, but rather to help you answer questions. And since we have a medium-sized audience this morning, it's certainly no problem to just come forward if you have any questions and interrupt me and derail my talk to go anywhere else that you would like to go rather than following my slides. So the main idea here really is to be informative for you to answer your questions. So let's just make this as interactive as we can to help you achieve that goal. Okay. I think I'm audible. This I just use for the recording, which will be available later on. We may have to pass it around if there are questions. I don't know yet. And well, so this is going to be the first tutorial in the program. We have announced that as Semantic MediaWiki only. So this is about everything related to the system that you need to know before you can start working with it or doing any of the advanced material. Now, on the other hand, I suppose that many people already have worked with Semantic MediaWiki to some extent. So some things which I could tell here might be far too basic for you. To clarify that, maybe let's start with a quick poll. Who has worked with Semantic MediaWiki? Okay, great. So there are people who have not, which is the target audience. So I will always go to the. I mean, so see, I will always try to go from the lower end here in terms of knowledge, and so it will be a basic lecture, but I still hope I won't bore you. Who of the people who use it already have used it and also administrated and set it up? So are running the server and everything. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, I guess that's the main audience. And I mean, generally there are large user communities, but there are some people who have to make sure the things run and both make the technology work and also make sure that the system is used in a way that is actually productive and achieves its goals. I think I can't ask you much more at the moment. Maybe, yeah, one more thing. How many of these, who is running a wiki which is public? Okay. So, and who's running something which is in an enterprise or organizational context? Specifically, okay, so interestingly, most of the wikis are public, which is good. Okay, nice. So as I said, this is going to be basic at first, but well, maybe one more thing. MediaWiki. Is there anybody who has not worked with MediaWiki yet? Okay, so. Okay, then I'll also go through that a bit, because obviously Semantic MediaWiki and MediaWiki are closely related, as the name suggests. And one reason why we have this horrible name that nobody can quite remember where the spaces are going in is because MediaWiki already is spelled like this, and then we had made it a bit more horrible even by adding another incomprehensible word in front of it. Okay, so let me start with some general information. Some of this you may already know, some of this might be new. So what is Semantic MediaWiki? Right, so Semantic MediaWiki is a content management system which is used for managing two types of content: richly formatted hypertext documents like in Wikipedia. And the new thing is structured data as well, which I will explain in a minute what it means. And this, in contrast to other content management systems, is done in the Wiki way, which means it's user-governed, collaborative, and supposedly easy. So usually there is some relativity to that statement. It's definitely easier than editing plain HTML, unless you already know that. But there are certainly some things to know before you can really do that. OK, so Semantic MediaWiki, as I said, obviously is based on MediaWiki, which is a wiki engine. So a content management system for managing these richly formatted hypertext documents. It's an extremely popular system. It's used on Wikipedia. Everybody has seen that, at least in this context. It's used on by Wikia, the world's largest wiki hosting provider, with about 200,000 registered wiki sites alone on this one provider. And certainly there are above 100,000 different websites running this system out on the internet, and more in companies in many applications. Accordingly, it has been translated into hundreds of languages. You get the UI in any language you wish for. It is free, it is open source, and it's also open development, which are three things which are not quite the same and should not be confused. So free means it has a free license. You don't have to pay for it. You can use it. And open source means you can also see the code and view the code, which is hard to prevent with any PHP system. So there probably any system written in PHP as a main programming language is open source, but it's not necessarily free. And importantly, it also has a completely open development, which means that you can see the source code that developers are working on at the very moment, and you can see what they are doing. You can interact with them. You can actually become a developer very easily, which is important because it makes the whole thing very stable and risk-free. So there's no single entity or organization that controls development, and if it would go away, we would have a problem, but rather it is very distributed in general. On the other hand, the Wikimedia Foundation, which is a charity running Wikipedia, has a lot of interest, of course, in keeping the system functional, and also runs its main application in Wikipedia, and so there is some full-time professional staff also working on the system hired by Wikimedia. I already mentioned it's written in PHP. There's also a lot of JavaScript. Main database behind it is MySQL. Other SQL databases are working more or less. Semantic MediaWiki now is implemented as a so-called MediaWiki extension, which means it's a modular add-on to the system which it extends. Which is very nice because it means you can just drop it into an existing MediaWiki to get its functionality. It's fully compatible with all current and recent versions there. And in particular, it's not a fork. It's not a new software, but it's an extension of an existing software. And any improvement happening in MediaWiki will also happen for Semantic MediaWiki quite quickly afterwards. Usually we are compatible with the latest development versions of MediaWiki, so we're always sufficiently ahead of developments to make sure that the next stable release is going to work smoothly with Semantic MediaWiki as well. It's also free, open source, open development. In this case, without any fixed staff. There's all volunteers, though there are some related occupations, I should say. You can see I'm at the University of Oxford, so maybe some of this qualifies as research for me. Other people working in our team are at Wikimedia Germany and Wikidata, where also related things are going on, as we will learn in these days. So, but in the end, it's all volunteer development. There's nobody really hired for developing the system. It's very closely integrated with MediaWiki as such. We have the same source control, and many of the developers overlap. Current main people in Semantic MediaWiki are Jeroen de Douw, who is going to be here sometime today, I suppose, and myself, and quite a few other people. Okay, same technologies underlying, and in addition to SQL databases, we also support RDF databases as secondary storage, if you like. Okay, so the whole system is fairly well established and stable. We have been around since 2005, which is a long time, actually. MediaWiki itself is around since 2003, I think, in its form as it was now. So it is one of the oldest MediaWiki extensions. It's also one of the largest in terms of contributors, in terms of code, and in terms of activity and development. We have a lot of documentation online, so this is where you find everything. I'm sure you have seen this website. If you Google for Semantic MediaWiki, is what you get immediately. Carsten is our main maintainer for this documentation, which also gets translated into many languages by now. So we are very grateful that to have a lot of support there. Carsten will be here tomorrow, I think. Well, we have this twice yearly conference, one in Europe, usually one in America, usually the US so far, but maybe there might be one in other places as well in the future. We have some organizational support, so this is this OSDA, Open Semantic Data Association, that sometimes pops up here. It's our organizational backend for allowing us to organize such things here. And, well, I already mentioned that. Okay, so much for the background. Now let me give you a quick introduction to MediaWiki. Most of you know that, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. And of course, everybody knows how MediaWiki looks, right? So this is what you see in most MediaWikis, more or less. Some of them look fairly different, but this is the default look and skin of MediaWikis, and most people are familiar with the basic controls there already. As a wiki system, again, this is quite a popular concept these days. Wasn't so much 5 years or 10 years ago, but these days I think most people know that pages are edited in some kind of wiki text syntax, which allows you to create markup based on a simplified syntax, which is not quite HTML, and uses some very basic markups that are not so difficult to learn. It has a lot more markup than other wiki systems. So if you compare it to other wiki systems, you see many things are more explicit and have more syntax in MediaWiki actually than they would have in other systems. The reason is that MediaWiki tries to produce or allow you to produce beautiful pages. So it doesn't want words which are grammatically crippled because you have to write them in camel case to make a link out of them, things like that. There are very simple documentation wikis that you use in some other contexts which have a lot less syntax and just auto-link everything they find spelled in a certain way, but which do not give you so much control over the appearance and layout. And so I would say in terms of wiki systems, MediaWiki is actually an outlier on the side of complex syntax, but also on the side of pretty pages. Danny has a remark? Oh yeah, yes, Danny noted rightly. Of course, everybody who doesn't know MediaWiki is now completely confused why they have two opening and only one closing bracket. The answer is they don't, though this should be two. Not going to go through this. I mean, MediaWiki has a lot of online documentation. It's very easy to learn how to edit it. This is mainly to illustrate the core concepts and how MediaWiki source code looks. A very important thing which we will see in similar forms in Semantic MediaWiki as well is this double bracket syntax for making links. So if you have a page called like this, then putting double brackets around that will create a link to that very page. You can also change the title of the text displayed instead of in place of the link, but link to this page anyway. But this is a very important syntax for us. Okay, so MediaWiki has a lot of features, including a lot of wiki text that I'm not going to explain it here. There are some HTML-like features that also work just like an HTML, so like the sub for subscripts or the style attribute for using cascading style sheet information in elements. So these things known from HTML can also be used in many places. There are some very advanced things like image formatting and table formatting, which has all kinds of related features and is really very, very well documented online. So this is not very difficult to learn, but definitely a bit beyond the tutorial I'm giving here. However, what is important is to understand at least some basics about how pages are structured, because again, MediaWiki is a bit different from most other systems here in the wiki space. This is the general form of a title in MediaWiki. So it consists of a namespace, colon, a title, slash a subpage title. So this is what page name, page identifier can look like in MediaWiki. I have some examples here now. This is kind of obvious. It's exactly the pattern I described. If there's no namespace at all, it just means it's the main namespace. This is a common case, right? So this is colon, for example. There are talk pages, talk colon. And then there are all kinds of exceptions. So actually, the people who know MediaWiki should realize, hopefully, that this is not a namespace, this is not a namespace, and this is not a subpage. So in fact, if I color code this, these are just plain title strings, in spite of the colons and slashes in there. And this is quite a typical situation for MediaWiki. Things work like something, and then there is an exception for many cases. And in fact, this is something many beginners confuse at the beginning. What is actually a namespace, for example? The main thing to know here is not everything you put in front of a title with a colon is a namespace. And basically, the namespaces are configured. You can add new namespaces in your local configuration. By default, you have a certain number of namespaces: user, category, template, help, MediaWiki, file, special, and the so-called project namespace, which is usually the name of your site. These namespaces are used to distinguish basic types of pages. They are not meant to really organize content. They are, you can see here many of these things are very special. User pages are very special. Category pages are special. Special pages are particularly special because they cannot even be edited. They are in fact special types of services that show you certain information about the wiki or allow you to change something. And files is for uploading files. So in fact, all of this is more or less related to some technical distinctions, which are not just on the content level. Maybe help and project are the only namespaces which don't have any technical significance and are just there to help you search for content as opposed for help. So these namespaces can be used to narrow down the scope of your text searches, and often it is desired that if somebody searches in the wiki for a certain keyword, they don't find the help page on that keyword, but they find the content page on that keyword. This is why the help pages, which should have user documentation, system documentation, and so on, are distinguished from the rest, but otherwise it's not meant to be a content structure. And of course, there are all these talk pages, which are not very, not the greatest way of solving the task of having discussions in a wiki system. You know that. So talk pages are like pages and are meant to have comments and talks and discussions on them about a certain page. But editing discussions like a wiki page is not always a good idea, and there are some extensions that can help making it better. Okay, so these are namespaces. The other thing I mentioned are subpages. They are even less well understood, I would say. Subpages are prefixes separated, postfixes separated by a slash. So anything after a slash is a subpage name, but only on certain namespaces. So subpage is a subpage depending on the namespace that its main page is in. By default, only the user's namespace and the talk namespaces have subpages. All the other namespaces, if you add a slash, just means that you have a slash in your title. And we have seen the examples before that this can actually be quite reasonable and useful. There are very little technical ramifications of the distinction if it is a subpage or not, mainly related to moving things. So if you move a page, then all its subpages will move with it. So then in this case, there is a difference between whether these things are just other pages with a title that has a slash or real subpages. But usually this is not how you structure the content in a wiki either. So the thing with subpages is it gives you a very rigid, hierarchical, hard to change structure. And this is not how you want to organize content. You don't want to have city/Berlin, like a folder of all the cities, because then Berlin is also a capital, and Berlin is also a state of Germany, in fact. So it's a bit too rigid to have it only in one place, and it's hard to change afterwards without changing all the links. So in fact, this is not something that really makes much sense for wiki organization. It makes sense for user pages because you want to make sure a user can have many pages owned by himself or herself. And so you allow subpages there. And then you have the third thing, which I haven't mentioned so far, which are categories. And these are now really the way how you organize data in MediaWiki. So in categories, you can put a page into a category, for example, in the category of cities, by putting a link to the according category page into the article. So this is another exception in the behavior of MediaWiki. If you put this here, this is a perfectly valid article name with a namespace and a title, and you put a link around it. So normally you would get a link to this page, but since this is a category namespace, it's not going to show a link, but rather it means page is in category, and will add your page to this category, and it will appear at the bottom of the page, but not at the place where you put it. This is a bit suboptimal. I hope that future will bring better solutions to that. So one reason why this is not so great is that in the end it doesn't matter where in the article you put this link, it will always have the same meaning. But if you don't put it at the bottom, it can be very confusing because it's hard to find out where this link was actually put. And it would be much nicer, obviously, if you could just directly edit it, and there are some extensions doing that already. Maybe this is going to be a standard in MediaWiki at some point as well. Categories themselves, I mentioned it, are pages, so they can be described on pages, which is useful. And these pages themselves can also be categorized. For example, you could say on the page of category city, you put another link, category settlement. And in this case, this will have the intuitive meaning not city. The category city is a settlement, is an instance of settlement, but rather it would say the category city is a subcategory of the category settlement, which is similar to saying, well, if you're interested in settlements, you should also look at cities. The meaning of categories in MediaWiki is very, very informal. Mainly it's used for browsing. It's not even used for search, so you cannot search for just the things in a certain category. And it is not possible to filter based on categories or any other thing. So this makes it very implicit, and it's more like a tag in a tag-based system than it is like a class in a classification-based system. And it tends to be very messy as a consequence. So it also doesn't have to be a hierarchy. So basically you can have many parent categories, so there's kind of a multi-inheritance. There can even be cycles, which would definitely be not a desired situation, but can happen, of course, if you have large category hierarchies and nobody checks. Though it's a very informal structuring feature, but it's still the main way of structuring and organizing pages in MediaWiki. Okay. And then there's one more thing which should be mentioned here in this context, also maybe related to structuring and organizing, which are redirects, which I think is a really great feature that is misspelled here, by the way, as well, and that many wikis are actually lacking. So many other wiki engines, I have really missed this feature. Basically, if you insert just this on a page as the only, and you spell it correctly, redirect instead of redirect, with the link of a target page after that, it means that whenever somebody goes to this page where this is on, he or she will directly be referred to the target page. And this is really great for searching things, because otherwise in a wiki you quickly end up having 3 or 10 pages for the same stuff, because people were not aware that there already is a page, and there are different spellings and different related terms that somebody could search for. And if you have 10 redirects to one page, it helps to really integrate all that stuff. So this is really an extremely useful feature for creating synonyms and search hints. Okay, so much for the basic organization mechanism. So we know how page titles work, we know how redirects work. I would like to mention 1 or 2 more specific features which also are very nice and extremely useful for MediaWiki. The most important one definitely in this category are templates. In general, transclusion is the process, especially in a wiki or in a content management system, of inserting one page, embedding one page into another. This is a concept that exists in many systems, including other non-wiki-like content management systems. And in MediaWiki, it has another twist in the form of parameters, which allow you to not just embed one other page into your current page as it is, but they also allow you to substitute certain placeholders for parameter values that you provide in the transcluded page. So you have seen the image of Cologne, which is a typical example of a Wikipedia article. And in many Wikipedia articles, you have these info boxes on the right. And these info boxes always should look the same, obviously. So they are created by templates. And only the content of the info boxes is exchanged by giving the content as parameters to that template. That ensures a consistent look. And it makes everything much more manageable, because if you want to change the color of the info box, you just have to do it in one place and not in hundreds of thousands or 100,000s of articles. So this is a very powerful and useful feature. The syntax to do that is very simple. You just use these curly braces here and give the name of the page to embed into your current page, and maybe parameter values. You can give any number and any naming of parameter values here. So this is parameter 1, has value 1, and so on. And these parameters then may or may not be used within this page. If they are used, it looks like this. So there is some code for inserting the value of this parameter into this position in a page. And this means that when you transclude this page with value 1 instead of parameter 1, you will see the string value 1 in this place where you put that. So this is all fairly simple. Special thing here, template is the default namespace for doing that. So if I just write it like this, it will look for a page called template : page to transclude. In fact, you can transclude any page. There's no particular reason why you should only transclude templates technically, but it makes things much more manageable if you have a special namespace for this. Because template pages look very different from content pages. You don't want a template to show up in a search result, because it doesn't contain any information yet. It's just an empty template. And so it makes sense to have a namespace for this. But transclusion as such in MediaWiki is not specific to templates. You can just, if you write here another namespace, category, for example, you can also transclude a category page, which is interesting. I don't know whether this transcludes all the category listings as well. So normally on a category page, you can see all the pages in the category. Not sure if this is getting pulled in if you do the transclusion. Probably a good idea to just not do it like that. So it's good to stick to the standard procedures for things. Okay, so templates, very important, very powerful. And then there are all kinds of other things which I'm not going to mention in any more detail. Parser functions, text switches, and variables. So there is one, parser functions may be most important for our purposes here. So again, we are missing a brace here. There must be a software bug deleting braces at the ends of lines. I can't imagine that there's any other reason for them missing here. So this is how you transclude a parser function. The idea with a parser function is that it's a bit like a template. You put something into your page, but what is shown there doesn't come from another page, but it's computed in some way which is specified by the parser function and has been programmed before. So there are, for example, parser functions to check a condition. They are called if and if-eq for checking equality of two things. And you can then say, if the condition is satisfied, you want to see this text. If it's not satisfied, you want to see another text. And this can be done with this kind of syntax, very similar to templates, just usually with this hash symbol here. In fact, there are also parser functions without this symbol. It's not really technically required, but it creates a lot of extra confusion if there are parser functions without that symbol. So if you program any parser functions, please add this symbol, because otherwise it's really not clear if it's a template or not. Also, usually there's a colon after the function name for the first parameter. I don't know why that is. Somebody thought it's nice or looks good. It's probably because the first parser functions that we had just one parameter, and it was kind of natural to put a colon there. But this is no longer the case. Then there are a few wiki HTML or XML-like tags. which you can write no wiki, no include, include only, mainly to prevent something to be processed. If you want to write something which normally would be formatted automatically by MediaWiki, you can put a no wiki tag around it to make sure it's not changed. There are some behavior switches, as they are called, which you can insert anywhere on a page to have a certain effect, and sometimes you have to insert them as a special at a particular position to have a certain effect there. Most common one, if you want to switch off the automatically generated table of contents, you could put this into your page. These are 2 underscores on each side. SMW has some other things like show fake box that you can put on a page. And then finally, you have variables, as they are called, which are actually parser functions without any parameters that just give you a certain piece of information. For example, the name of the page you're on can be retrieved like this. The current day, according to the setting of the server, can be retrieved like this, and so on. So there are many, many such variables. Okay. So that's finishing my brief overview of MediaWiki and the concepts which I think are particularly important for us to just understand here on a high level. Are there questions to that point? Okay. Okay, so good. So as I said, there's a lot of online documentation if you really want to find out how to edit pages, how to create a certain layout. It's well beyond such a tutorial here, and it's also very specific, and it just has to be looked up, but it's usually very well documented. Okay, now to the actual topic of this tutorial, Semantic MediaWiki. So Semantic MediaWiki, I already mentioned, is an extension. It allows you to do a number of things. You can store and manage data, you can browse and view data, you can search pages based on their stored data, you can format and display data, and you can even export data. And of course, with all these features, the principal and first question that should be asked is actually, what is data when I speak about data? So I said management of structured data, okay, but this is definitely not something which is self-explaining. Certainly, pages as such are already data, so there has to be some clarification here first to see what this really means. So, in fact, data in Semantic MediaWiki is very simple. In essence, data is or consists of property value pairs that can be assigned to pages in the wiki. For example, I could assign to the page colon, I could assign property value pair has population 1, well, that should be commas in English, of course, 1,017,155. To the article about Germany, I could assign the property has capital with the value Berlin. To Spinoza, I could assign the property born on with value 24th November 1632. So we can see there are different types of values we can have here. Berlin is probably a page. This number is probably not a page. Likewise, the state is usually not a page. But this case is particularly interesting because it shows us that pages can be related to other pages by properties. But in the end, property value pairs are just the second and the third component. And you can have many of them for every page, obviously. Okay, so this is a very simple way we think of data here. And if you want to have it in a more graphical fashion, it makes perfect sense to think of something like this. You have the blue things here should denote pages in a wiki. So you have a page about Germany, a page about Berlin, Angela Merkel and Klaus Wowereit. And you have certain properties pointing from one to the other. Germany has capital Berlin, has Chancellor Angela Merkel, and Berlin has population. And here I have a red box to show that this is not really a page, but rather just some value and a certain mayor. So this is how you can envision data. And of course, the arrows can go back and forth. You could also have something in the page, on the page of Berlin, you could say something about Germany, which gives you another direction. So there's no directionality in the overall graph and no freedom of cycles or anything like that. Importantly, however, these annotations, as we call them, so these property value pairs are always associated with the page that they belong to. So if I want to change the information I've stored about Berlin, I would go to the article on Berlin, and it would allow me to edit these two things here. Whereas the has capital relationship between Germany and Berlin is coming from Germany, so it would be found on the article of Germany. That's a very important principle in Semantic MediaWiki. All data is associated with one page where it comes from. It's subject, as we say. Sometimes this is called subject property object, but I prefer property value because of such cases here, which is more like a value. And but this still can be called a subject, of course. Okay, so this is data, basically. You can just scale that to 100,000 or a few million pages, and you have a very big graph. But this is the type of information that we store. Now, how is this entered? I already mentioned it's entered on the page that it refers to. For example, if I have Germany has capital Berlin, I could do that in two basic ways. The classical way, which we have had around for a longer time even, is to do it like this. And here you can recognize the link syntax. You can put something on the page saying has capital : Berlin. We use two colons here to make sure it's not confused with all the other single colon cases with like a namespace, for example. And if you do that, it will just display like a normal link as if you would have entered this Berlin at this position. But it will store the information that this was a has capital relationship. And this makes somehow sense, because normally if there is a relationship like having a certain capital, then you will also want to talk about this thing in the article. So it's not unlikely that there is a link to Berlin in a page that has Berlin as its capital. And so you just have to enter this in addition, and you get this annotation. And then there's a second way of doing that, which was introduced slightly more recently, but also for a long time now. This is a set parser function, which is a parser function. You know that syntax, so curly braces here. Set is the name with a hash in front. And then you say capital equals Berlin. And this is just not displayed at all. So this is, well, to the extent that we can manage to not display anything. Sometimes there are strange effects. If you have a lot of such parser functions next to each other, you get some empty lines or something. There are workarounds. But usually this should really look as if you had not entered anything at all at this position. Which makes it a bit similar to the category annotations, which also can appear anywhere on the page and will not have any effect on the place where they are put, but will in the end add something to the page as a whole. Okay, so these are the two basic methods. There are more methods in the end. Anybody could write other methods or come up with other methods to enter the data. We are not really, this is not the essence of Semantic MediaWiki to have these syntax forms. Okay. Now, I've used properties already quite a lot. Germany is a wiki page, Berlin is a wiki page, and I have this property has capital between the two. So what is has capital? And in fact, has capital is also a wiki page, but in order to distinguish this from Germany and Berlin and all the content pages, we introduce a new namespace, which is called property. So we have a page in the namespace property, which is called has capital, and which you can use like the category pages in MediaWiki already to describe this property and also to add additional information about it. So describing is important, because otherwise users won't know how to use them if they want to use them in a new way. But even more importantly in many cases is to declare certain basic pieces of information on these pages which are relevant for SMW to know how to treat them. So you have seen there are many different properties, and they are not just different because they have different names, but they also have, for example, a different data type. So I have had some examples where you have a date, right? So the born on property had a date given, and the population property had a number given. And of course, you do not want these things to appear like links. You don't want to have a link to this number, because there is no such page. And in order for SMW to know what you mean there has to be some kind of declaration of a data type. And this is what I just said. So there is a distinction between things like basic links and things like numbers, and you want them to appear differently, so there's this output distinction. And also there's another thing, you want also to have a different input handling in these cases. If somebody enters my property with this string and somebody else enters my property with this string, now with the correct thousands separator in English, then these are two different values if these are pages. So this page has a different name than this page, right? But if these are numbers, then they should have the same value because these are just two ways to write the same number. And similarly, even much more importantly for things like dates and other data types, where there are many ways to write them, and we don't want all these ways to mean different things. So Semantic MediaWiki somehow has to process these things to make sure they are recognized. Okay, and for all this, some basic information is needed. We can't guess what the user wants here. There are many pages that have titles like this and shouldn't be interpreted as numbers just because they look like a number. And so there has to be some kind of declaration. And, oops, I wonder there should be a slide to tell you how to actually add these. I think this got deleted somehow. This sometimes happens if I edit slides in graphical tools. Yeah, okay, so there should be a page which actually tells you how to create such a type. I have typed it. I don't know where it's gone. To def null, I guess. So let's put it on this page virtually. Here's a lot of space. So how to declare that? Normally, if you declare a type, you will again do that with a property. You will add a piece of data to the property page itself. So you go to the page of has population, and on this page, property has population, you enter a new property value, has type number, for example. And on the page property born on, you might want to enter has type date. Now, there are a few basic types. The default type by default is wiki page. So if you have not declared a property at all, maybe it doesn't even have a page, it's going to be interpreted like a link. But you can also say that explicitly, and it's usually a good idea to make it explicit, so it's clear that you didn't just mistype your property name, but it's really the property you wanted with the right type. And there are a few basic types. I already showed you dates, numbers, wiki pages. There are also geographic coordinates if you want to denote places on Earth or on other planets in the future maybe, but mainly on Earth. And there are text types, so sometimes you just want to store something as a text, as a string, and there are a few other types for specific cases. There's even booleans where you can store just true or false. And all of these give you according input and output behavior as you like it. Okay, so with this together we have already learned enough to actually enter this. So you could now go to a wiki and create this type of data by just creating according pages, creating according properties, and entering these property value pairs in a method of your choice on the wiki page. So this is fairly simple. Now once you did that, what do you do with it? There are various ways of retrieving data, mainly with special pages, to just view it in the first place. Because if you enter data, the first thing is you want to see what you entered and check what is going on there. Also, if you have any problems with your wiki, usually it's a good idea to first check what it really understood, what it really got. And there are a number of special pages to do that. Special browse is probably the most important one. Maybe I should. Oh, interesting. Where's my? Maybe I can show you an example of this. Here we have it. I didn't show much examples here. Of course, this is a very practical system. You can see everything online, so it makes sense to show it, but it takes a long time to go through all pages, and so I rather want to avoid this here. Okay. So here, for example, I have a Semantic MediaWiki, which has to do it like this, which has a certain amount of information on it. For example, I have here such a page which is about some kind of event, some conference, and now on this wiki no fact boxes are shown by default, but if I would edit this page, this is what I get. This is the template at the top, which does most of the annotations, and I press preview, I will get at the very bottom a fact box which shows me everything I entered. So this is always enabled. By default, we don't show this fact box anymore in every article, because usually in many articles you already have a much nicer info box at the top which shows you the data, and you already have the data in a format you want to have it in, and it doesn't make much sense to show the data again in a random format, because you can see here we don't know how these things associate with each other, so we just order them alphabetically, which doesn't always make sense. So for example, the start date of the conference is down here, whereas the end date is up here. Should probably be better closer to each other if you want to display it nicely. But anyway, here you can check if things were understood. And then this is the page special browse I told you about. So this is like special browse / page name, where you can see all the data, including things which link here from other pages. In this case, there are no such things, but we can see it if we go somewhere else. So here, for example, we have a person, and this person is linked to from various other pages with these properties, and is also having own properties associated. Okay. Now I just have to find out where my slides are. Here we go. Okay, so this is how you can view these things, and so this gives you a basic access to the data you entered, and there are also a number of other interfaces that show you this data in other views. We don't have any graphical view. Sometimes people think, oh, this is all like arrows and things pointing to each other, so let's have a graphical view. This is never a good thing in my experience, or at least not in most cases, because graphical views tend to be cluttered and incomprehensible as soon as you have a realistic amount of data. If you have just a bit of test data, like here for illustration, it's good. You can also imagine it like this, but if you would show all the things, all properties of a few pages on one screen with an automatically generated layout, it's going to be very messy, very hard to find any label in there, and not containing any more information than the more easy to read table I just showed you. Okay, there's another way to access data. So this is how you can browse it on the wiki. You can go to various pages to see what data is there. And then there's also a way to embed data that you already entered back into other pages, or into the same pages if you like, using a parser function which is called show. So for example, if you want to show the population of Berlin, you just enter show Berlin question mark has population. Question mark is, we'll come to that later on, it's our syntax for property printout, so it's used in other contexts, that's why we have it here. Of course, it's a bit redundant. But this allows you to show this number anywhere you like, which is nice because you don't have to enter it many times if you want to use it everywhere. You can rather just take it, enter it in one place and take it in all the other places. So if somebody changes the number, it will update in every place more or less instantly. Of course, there can be caches. And similar here, Germany shows the capital of Germany. Okay, so this is another way to edit this data. And then there are also a third way, which is maybe the most important for most people, is our so-called ask queries, right? So, which is a mechanism that allows you to search pages based on their data. And this is the killer feature that people want to have when they install Semantic MediaWiki. This is one thing where they really need it for. Because it gives you a search functionality based on data that you otherwise just don't have in MediaWiki. Already when it comes to categories, if you just want to show all the pages in one category in another page, it is already difficult or impossible to do that in MediaWiki. This you can do with this ask parser function, saying ask for category city. You can also ask for things which have mayor class override, show all pages with that data. So you can see the principle here. It's very simple. You just enter the thing you look for on the page, and it will show you all pages that have this information. Not necessarily entered in this form. You could also have entered it with that or any other way, but this is what we use here as a syntax. And you can combine this. You can look for only the cities that have mayor class override, which will not really be a restriction in that case, but maybe in some other case. So you can combine these conditions. And this you can directly write into articles, and at the very place where you do that, you will get the listing. And this is very powerful and very useful because it allows you to create pages that have this information on them without your main reader group knowing how you did that. Because this you only have to edit if you are an advanced editor, somebody who really knows about the system. But viewing the page, reading the page, everybody can, and you will always get these results. So it allows you to store queries, to hard code queries into your wiki, and this is often very successful and very useful in practice. Okay, before I go into the details of Ask, maybe I should stop for just a moment of taking breath and asking if there are questions so far. I know for most people it's pretty basic still, but yeah, that's it. Please.
You mentioned earlier. The name's Giles Benson. I'm from the charity Oxfam in the UK. I was interested in your comment about how I think a graphical representation was not of value in your opinion. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes. I have to say it bluntly, yes. I think graphical representation is not a value in a generic form. Of course, if you have a specific domain and the domain suggests graphical representation or is even usually using graphical representations for its data, it's a different issue. But then you have background information already, which allows you to make meaningful graphical representations. But just visualizing generic data in a graphical way, all in one, it's going to be overwhelming. And what I dislike about it most is that graphical representations seem to suggest that more information is present than actually is. Because in graphical representation, one thing might be on the top right corner, one thing on the bottom left. And somehow it seems that they are far away because they are in different corners. But in Semantic MediaWiki, obviously, there is no such information. There is no such meaning. There's no notion of being far or close or being more on the right or more on the left of the screen. And if you have graphical representations, these graphical representations somehow have to make this extra information up. And usually they don't do that in a very intuitive way because it's hard to guess what humans think is close to each other and what is far away. But there have been a lot of attempts to make graphical browsers also in the context of the semantic web, RDF viewers, which has contributed to my conviction that this is not a useful thing to do. Okay, any other questions? Okay, so let me go on. So Ask. This is best shown by examples, really. I mean, let's just. This is the result of an Ask page, Ask query. So here you have a query which shows events together with some extra data. I will come to that. If I edit this, I see how it's done. I ask for things in the category event with an end date that is greater or equal to current year, current month, current day. This is a bit of a hack. I'm using MediaWiki special variables here to create the current date and to ask for things in the future, things that end in the future. And let's forget about all this for now. So this is how much we learned so far. And if I go and show the preview of this is what I get. A simple list of pages with links on each. Okay, here we go. Okay, now I have other ways of displaying data or selecting data. We have seen these. we have seen these two possibilities, which are pretty suggestive. They just look like what you would enter to make this information. In some cases, you cannot quite do that because you want to have more general things than you normally enter. For example, if you just want to look for pages that have some population, but not necessarily say which one it is, then you can just do it like this. Yeah, well, at least this does work. So you can just enter a plus here. It should maybe be a star, but for historical reasons, it's a plus. Pages with some population. You can also ask for pages which are in a certain namespace. The plus is a little bit like a wildcard in our syntax here. If you want to ask for pages in namespace category, you have to do it like this. Otherwise, it's confused with asking for the category, which is called plus, which in MediaWiki you can have. Maybe we should change that to be less confusing. But yeah, these are more important here. Wildcards for values and wildcards for page names. And you can combine all of them. Just juxtaposing these conditions will make them AND conditions, which are all satisfied for all the results. You can also use an OR to say that you want to have either this or this. You look for all things which are either cities or towns. And this does also work. You can also invert the direction of properties. So you have seen all the properties, they work like arrows. And sometimes you may want to ask for the capitals of Germany, not for the things that have Berlin as its capital. Now, of course, you could write it in both ways. You could write on the page of Berlin is capital of Germany, but this would be a bit redundant because you already have the information that Germany has capital Berlin. So another way to solve that is to just invert the direction of the has capital property, and we do that with the little minus afterwards. So if you have has capital minus, basically it would be the meaning of is capital of, would have the meaning of is capital of. Okay, and this can actually be done in all SMW interfaces that take property values, just not when adding data. And so you can also browse properties using the inverse. It only works for wiki page properties, obviously, because only these can point from and to pages. So inverting them still gives you pages, otherwise it wouldn't. Okay. And I already showed you in the example in the browser now that there are actually more cases of property values, not just specify one value or specify any value, but you can also say something like greater or equal to 1,000, less or equal to 1,000, unequal to 1,000. Again, the data type plays an important role here because greater or equal, how do we actually order? For numbers, it's obvious how we want to order. For strings, we want to order differently, usually by the alphabet. For dates, we want to order by the time that they refer to it, by the point in time. So the data type is also important for this type of thing to work properly. Important for all of these conditions is that they all mean the page has some value for has population, which has this property of being greater or equal to 1,000. In particular, the last one is always a bit tricky for users. This means the page has some value which is not equal to 1,000. It's not the same as saying the page has no value of 1,000. It could actually even have another value which is equal to 1,000. So this asks for information that is there, not for information that is not there. Existence of a value in equal to 1,000, not non-existence of a value equal to 1,000. Parentheses are important here to understand the quantifiers. Okay. In fact, you can't ask for the absence of information in Semantic MediaWiki. Interesting issue, can be worked around a bit. Maybe we should do something about it in the future. Not decided yet. And oh yeah, now even more complicated stuff is possible. Complicated mostly in terms of syntax. You can have subqueries. You can, instead of specifying the value of a property by saying it's greater than 1,000 or it's unequal to 1,000, you can also say the value itself should come from the results of a query. And to do that, you can write another query inside your query enclosed in Q tags for query. This is again a bit historical. If somebody has a better idea how to use what syntax to use here, I'm all happy to hear it. Because this is obviously ugly, but frankly everything's ugly in MediaWiki because you have to do all your markup has to consist of brackets, braces, and hashes and colons, And this must lead to some confusion at some point. If you have ever seen a complicated template in MediaWiki, it's just not readable anymore. So these are write-only templates or syntax things. I think this is even not of at least 500,000 and has some mayor, which is irrelevant, but it should have one. And it also, the result itself should have a chancellor. So this is a possible way to imagine what a query actually does. It gives you such a pattern and it tries to find things that match this pattern. If you have category information, it would have to be presented a bit differently here maybe, but you can work it out. It's quite a good intuition, I think. An important thing here is this is going to be always a tree. Whatever you do in Semantic MediaWiki, you cannot specify anything that is not a tree here. So you cannot ask for people who died in the same city that they were born in. You cannot ask for people whose parents are married to each other. Everything where there's a cycle involved or other kinds of loops is not possible. But nobody has complained about it so far, so I suppose it's not an issue. But this is an implicit restriction that just comes about by using this query syntax that we have. I think few people really realize that. Yes, please. Yes. So you can have subqueries in subqueries. Sorry? Well, actually, just by nesting the text, it should be parsed correctly. If not, then there's a bug. Don't know if I tried it recently. Yeah.
Can you use the inverted property syntax in property chains?
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, inverted properties work in property chains as well. I just repeat the question because I think it's otherwise not on tape. Okay, so this is how you ask for queries, ask for results. So this is basically the language you can use to find pages, to do page search. And then the next question comes up, how do you want to display this data on the page? And this is an endless topic, obviously, because there are so many ways of displaying data. Here are some examples. We see some data based on maps where you get pop-ups when you click on one point with extra information, data even based on a three-dimensional cube, Earth, globe, data in some kind of slideshows, data in charts, whatnot. These are not mock-ups, these are all screenshots from somewhere which really show real wiki data. Okay, so doing this, the main thing I want to tell you here is just that, well, basically, in order to do such nifty little displays, you have to add extra data. These are not just pages. These are also, you can see here, there's some kind of, the power or the top speed of a car is here in this chart. So somehow this top speed must come from somewhere. The location of these marinas in this case is here relevant information for this display. So you have to get extra information, not just the pages. And this is done by so-called printout requests, or printouts just in a query, which look like that. So there are parameters that start with a question mark. You have seen that in show already. So you can just add question mark, property name, to tell Semantic MediaWiki that the values for this property should also be embedded into the result somehow. And by default, the somehow will just mean make a table, because that's the easiest way to show such data. Also, of course, I should point out that population could have many values. So this is not, if you are familiar with relational databases, this is not the same as doing a query in relational databases where you get tables back that have one entry per table cell. But this is something where you can have, for example, if something has many population numbers for some reason or has many mayors, you would get all of them in this one cell. So it's more like a three-dimensional than like a two-dimensional table. Actually, in the very, very first version, 0.1, we had the semantics in the you have in relational databases, but this is not nice for display, obviously, because if you have two populations and three mayors, you would get 6 rows with all combinations of them. You don't want that in most cases. So you get lists of values in a cell instead of just one value. Okay, but there is extra syntax to make sure you get only one value. There's also some extra syntax to control how these values look in each case. I'm not going to go into that. So once you have that, you can further say how you want this to be formatted. And for this, we just use the parameter format, which has a number of values. Here I give an example which is inspired by HTML syntax. So OL in HTML is the ordered list format, so you get an enumeration with of results, in this case with extra information in each case. And by adding this is what you get. So you can do that just to illustrate that once. So this is what you get when you do an ordered list. And if I would have other data in here, I would also see that data in parentheses in this case, because there is no other obvious way of doing it here. Okay, so this is how you can change the format. And there are many, many formats that all work a bit differently. For some formats, you have to make sure the format knows which properties it should treat in a special way. So if you want to have such a chart, then obviously it has to know which value should be mapped on the chart, which value should just be shown in the tooltip maybe, or which value, if you have many, is the coordinate. So there are ways of doing that. This is well documented. I'm not going to go into that. There are many, many different formats. The default is list if you have no extra information, and table if you have extra information. There are ordered and unordered lists. There are many export formats which give you just a link to a data export of your query result, for example in RSS feeds or in JSON notation or in comma separated values that you could use into a spreadsheet tool maybe. You can format results quite in complicated ways using templates. You can even embed other pages. There are maps. There are very fancy interactive formats that I showed you screenshots of here. Partly these are in extensions. Can't tell you about all of them. Okay, extensions. One of the images you get when Googling extensions. So this is mostly about Semantic MediaWiki extensions. Let me just give you the names of a few things. If you start Semantic MediaWiki, what should you install? What do you want to install probably to get all the features? I didn't talk here about semantic forms, so this is a very interesting way of entering data in the wiki. Gives you structured input forms that are far easier to handle for users, especially users who are not familiar with editing Wikipedia or similar systems. They get a form to fill out, and this form, when saved, will create a wiki page and have a lot of structured data, which is closely related to the form. Maps and semantic maps, I showed you already. See outputs that you can generate with them. This is what you need when you manage any kind of geographic data. And then if you want to have any kind of special result formats, there will be more talks about this at the conference. There are really some very nice, recently developed new things there in terms of output formats that are in this extension semantic result format. There are a few other extensions that are interesting. I'm not going to go into that. Main bottom line here is, if you are not so sure what to take, there's also a meta extension called Semantic Bundle, or a distribution semantic bundle that is maintained by Yaron Koren and some other people, and which gives you a package with all kinds of Semantic MediaWiki extensions and other useful extensions with MediaWiki packaged to work together. This is quite a useful thing to use. And also, of course, you would want to do something for spam fighting. We will have another talk about this today. Okay, now this gets me through the basics. Right? So I now have walked you through MediaWiki, basic data entering, and more importantly, how to query data with very few examples. I think more details need to be discussed one-to-one if you have questions on these basics. For the rest of my talk, I have a number of advanced topics which I will not be able to go through completely. So I can just pick some. And I wonder which to pick. So the next one is actually advanced data encoding. So there are some it is difficult to encode certain forms of data. Not everything works well. This is going to be about sub-objects. And later on, I also have another section about best practices, which is about how you should go about setting up such a wiki, or what kind of considerations you need to have when making properties. Which one shall we pick? Sub-objects? Best practices? Okay, so, well, 4 against 0. Something completely different, coffee break, is probably the rest of the people. Okay, so I'm just going over this. So, sub-objects. I hope the slides are a bit self-explaining. I will upload them on the wiki, so you can also look at this section later on if you like. Best practices. So, how are you going to get started? This, of course, in 15 minutes anyway, can only be a very general overview. Approach 1, install SMW and rely on the famous wisdom of the crowds to somehow make a productive and useful system. I don't know any case where this has worked. Maybe there is some. I'm not saying it can't work, but it's not common. Normally, you just install it. Either you have somebody who knows what to do, or nothing will happen. So the far better idea, if you want to create such a data-based wiki, is to kickstart it in some way by creating some properties, creating some input forms if you use forms, make some basic annotations, and show some queries that illustrate that this is going to be useful. So your users actually can make something with it. If you are in a company setting where people only reluctantly edit wikis anyway, in some cases, you may have to be the one to do these queries for all time. So you can't really rely on people doing lot work on this level. But you need to do it only once. When people enter data, the queries will get better and better and more useful without you actually interfering. So you just do the framework, the schema if you like, and the users fill it in. So the thing is, somehow Semantic MediaWiki doesn't solve all your problems, because it gives you a technical tool, but it doesn't tell you how to store your data, which data to store, how to query your data, which queries to use. And you should consider this when you start it. Of course, luckily, this is Wiki. You can always change your decisions later on. But it's good to start with something meaningful. And I think now the question usually people come up first with is which properties should be used. And I think the better question actually to ask is, what do you want to do with the data? So the goal is not to actually store all the data that is around in your wiki or in the world, but the goal is to do something. And usually the goal is to answer queries, to search for something. And you have to ask yourself, which information do I actually need to search pages in the way I would like to search them in the end? Or which information do I need to display them in a certain special way? For example, as a timeline, then I obviously have to store some times. Or do I have other uses of data, maybe some other systems I want to exchange it with? So what do I really need? And then design the properties based on these concrete requirements, based on what you envision to do with them. Usually a very good starting point to do that are templates, if you already have a wiki running which has templates. Because first of all, it's the most common style seen today in semantic wikis. So people do not enter property values directly on pages, or very rarely do so. What they usually do is they add the property annotations to the templates, which are used on the pages already. And then the templates, by being used, already create the data, collect the data, create the annotations, without users having to even know that there is such a thing happening. It also nicely integrates display, which is done with the template, usually in an info box, for example, and semantics of the thing that is displayed data. And it's a good starting point also if you want to use semantic forms, because they are heavily based on templates. So often this is quite suggestive. You have your templates and you can directly use values in these templates as property values. But also I would like to point out that templates can be used to compute additional data, even if people haven't entered it in quite the right way for you to use it. You can use the template to massage it a bit, or to augment it a bit to get what you want. In particular, I have mentioned the problem that Semantic MediaWiki cannot query for the absence of data. You cannot query for things that don't have a value for a certain property. But if you use a template, you can, of course, within the template check if a certain value is empty. And if it is empty, you can add a positive property, an information which is stored in Semantic MediaWiki that tells you value was empty. This value was empty. And you can use this later on to query pages that don't have a value of this type. So in fact, you can actually use the template to store the negative information, make it a positive piece of information that you can ask for. So that's a good idea, I think, in general, to work around this basic problem, and doesn't take much computational overhead. On the other hand, some people use templates to do string operations, to extract information from the data given by the user. This is not such a good idea, I would say. In general, MediaWiki has very powerful parser functions. You can do string matching, you can do all kinds of things in the wiki, but this is usually not very efficient and not very robust either, and doesn't have a good error handling and. So it's hard to maintain too. So in general, it is not a good idea to take a complicated user string and then write a program in MediaWiki to extract from this string some kind of relevant information. In this case, rather think about whether you can change your template a bit or go to PHP and program it there so it's efficient. Or I'm talking of PHP as being efficient, so you can see how bad it is already to do it in templates. Okay, I already mentioned this a bit. It is impossible to capture all human knowledge in property value pairs, period. You can't. There is always something which doesn't work. There are subtleties, there are things which just don't fit. So an important question to ask is how much should be covered and how exact and detailed should it be captured? Do not attempt to build an ontology of the world, if you know what an ontology is. So it is not about capturing everything, not even everything which is relevant to your wiki. Start with the easy and obvious. This is like an 80-20 rule, maybe a 90-10 rule. You can get most of the benefit of Semantic MediaWiki out by doing the things which are obvious, which are trivial, which are just as you would expect them to be. And do not abuse SMW, please. This is more like coming back to my original picture, this one. So SMW can do a lot, but some things are just hacks if you try to do them with SMW. And if it doesn't work, go to the developers, ask them what to do about it maybe. Or think about whether this is really the right tool for your purposes if it doesn't work. Because there are certain things which are just too hard to accomplish and will just give you a pain in the long run. So general rule, if it seems to be very complicated to solve something, step back, think about whether this is really the right tools I'm using here. Okay. One particular case of this is what I call the template temptation. Do not solve all problems with one template. So templates can use if to check for certain conditions and control their behavior based on parameters. This is used heavily in MediaWiki, especially on large wikis. Now with SMW, you can go farther and you cannot just use the information given in parameters, you can actually also use show and ask to gather more data to control the behavior. So in the end, you can actually control the whole display of a page by reading data from the database using queries and using if-sense on it. So I can show you an instance of this. This is a Wikia site, Familypedia, quite big, lots of interesting information, genealogy of people, including historical persons. You see a lot of information on that page about Pippin the Short. And now I can edit this with a form. which will show me all kinds of things if Familypedia is not down again. Okay. So this is how a form looks. So it's actually, you see there's not so much information in here. It's a long form, so it's hard to really tell. But it's easier to see it if you don't use the form. They hide this completely in this side, so they have only the form-based editing as a standard. But let's just look at the wiki text as it really is. Okay, loading the editor. So you can see there is some kind of template information. And then there's this nice little piece here, show facts biography. And in fact, interestingly, there's no text, there's no single sentence on this page. You may wonder why that is, because certainly you remember that when I showed you the text, there was some kind of paragraph to start with, so there were some sentences. Where did these sentences come from? Well, in fact, it turns out that the template show facts biography creates paragraphs based on stored data. So this is something I would definitely call abuse. Okay, well, how's the preview done here? I can't have a preview because I'm not allowed to edit. Let's see if we can see this show facts biography. I see. That doesn't really help. It doesn't help at all. Here. Templates. Show list of used templates. Yay. Okay. Show facts. Yeah. Show fact biography. Here we go. So what is this template, show fact biography? That's show fact biography. And the fact is, this is not, I mean, you would say, okay, this is not so bad. It's one page of text. But the fact is, all of these are templates. This is not what it really does. If you look at it, here, it uses show fact all the time. Get fact, show fact, get fact, show fact. No trailing comma. Nothing of this is clear. If you want to find out why it does these things, what it does, you have to look into these templates, and you end up in a hierarchy of some depth, I don't know, of templates, which you have to all understand to understand what is going on. And basically, it's like the concept here is that somebody thinks that since all the data is stored, in the end, to create a full-featured page, all you need is one template without any parameters. Everything else can be queried and then somehow built dynamically. This is really not a good idea. Don't do that. I mean, you have seen it's complicated, unmanageable. Nobody can maintain this anymore. Maybe a few people. It slows down your page display and rendering, which your users will hate. And it gives you unreasonable server load because there are hundreds and thousands of templates that need to be processed to just do that. And half of them, or most of them, actually run queries on the database based on Semantic MediaWiki. Danny?
Just to point out that in the future everything can be much better maybe, because Lua is coming up and the first tests with Lua speed seem to suggest that this kind of templates can turn out to become much more manageable than they are today.
Yeah, that's true. So first of all, it's true that in the future everything can become much better. I completely agree with that. And then the other important point is, yes, there's going to be Lua, a simple scripting language which will enable dynamic programming style content in MediaWiki. But still, the complication of this whole thing will remain, because if you have one template which caters for all possible situations, it's just going to be complicated, because the first thing is it checks what kind of situation it is in. It's always better if you have 10 possible situations, just make 10 templates and use the right one on the page you're on. So there's always a trade-off between generality and usability here. And even if the slowdown is kind of treated with Lua to some extent, may or may not help, because you still need somehow to query Semantic MediaWiki in between, which I don't know how it's integrated or going to be integrated in this Lua. even then it's still very complicated and unmanageable. I would even say anything that does what we have just seen must be complicated and unmanageable, because it's just such a complicated task. Also, related to this, avoid template-based displays if possible. So templates can be used to display data in Semantic MediaWiki. It's obviously a very powerful way if you want to format queries, because of course you can use tables and you can use lists, but wouldn't it be so much nicer if every result that you get is formatted according to your own personal private templates that you have crafted for that task? And this is actually possible and can be done. So I have time for, well, I don't have time. So let's just go to my homepage here, which is also Semantic Wiki. So here you see a list of publications, and this list of publications, this is all created by Semantic MediaWiki, and you can see a publication is not formatted like a table, it's not formatted like an ordered list. It has a special format where the authors are first, and then there's a title, and some things are linked, and then there are other links. You cannot do that with a default format, so it's nice to use templates for this, and Semantic MediaWiki allows you to do that, but it is not a good idea in most cases if you run a bigger wiki with many users. This is my homepage, I can do it there. But the problem is if you do that, it creates hundreds of templates calls per page, because it's easy to get 100 results, and every result will have a template, and this puts quite some load on MediaWiki. It turns out retrieving 100 results is not such a big deal from Semantic MediaWiki point of view, but parsing the result into a wiki page is a big deal for MediaWiki, and can put quite some load on your servers up to the point where you don't see any page anymore because there's timeout or out of memory error. There are two workarounds for this. One, you just store the result of rendering the template as a property value. Especially if you have one template that gathers all the data, you may as well use this very template to format the result and just store this formatted result as another property value as part of the page. And then you just query and insert these pre-formatted values. It gives you a bit of a lag because, no, it doesn't give you any lag, it's just the same. So it's actually, if you have just one typical way of displaying the data, then just store this as a text, pre-render it. It's like your own homemade cache. And it's much, much faster. We have done that on larger pages. And workaround two, create PHP code to do it properly. It's not as hard as it might seem. Writing your own formats, there are many formats these days, and this is partly due to the fact that it's not that hard to create them. Just 200 pages of PHP 200 lines of PHP can give you a nice result format for your particular special case, which is much more efficient to process. Yeah, briefly, I don't have much time left, but do not use, so topic using ask and show in property values, sentence, do not use ask and show in property values. It is possible to do something like this. You can say the property has mayor age is set to the value returned by this show query to has age of Klaus Wowereit. Yes, you can do that. It's going to give you a headache. We don't support it because simply there's no update mechanism for it. If somebody changes the value of has age for Klaus Wowereit later on, this page is not going to refresh this value. And there will never be a way to do that automatically, because if we would do that automatically, we would allow you to write any kind of program in this fashion, because you could use these propagations of values as kind of a register or a storage to store arbitrary information, and it would be kind of a Turing complete mechanism, and we wouldn't even know how to detect if this ever stabilizes or halts. Okay. Encoding lists. I don't think I have time to talk about encoding lists. So you have seen the author list I had on this publication wiki. This is difficult to do because information we have is not ordered by default. So we cannot we cannot easily store something with an order attached to it. It's also difficult to store lists as template inputs because templates already have no support for input lists. And it's a pain in various ways. I'm not going to discuss this. If somebody's interested, you can come to speak and speak to me later on. And yeah, then there's also the issue that maybe you have a data type which is not supported in Semantic MediaWiki. In this case, speak to us. It's actually easy to develop new data types. Maybe we can do it for you, or maybe you can do it yourself. It's usually not so difficult. So if you find that your type of data doesn't fit any of the existing data types, then there are ways around that. Okay, with this I would like to conclude my talk. Looking at the time, I think I'm already over time. I started late, okay, but we are all thirsty for coffee. Maybe I can take 1 or 2 questions now and the rest later that day. Thank you. Any questions? Otherwise, we cannot.
Yes, one question, organizational. What's the difference between Semantic MediaWiki and Wikidata? Because it looks like a little bit...
So yeah, what's the difference between Semantic MediaWiki and Wikidata? This is going to be the topic of Danny's keynote tomorrow. And it generally will be an important topic at our conference, so talking about the relationship between the two. So I think I just defer that to Danny's talk. Danny also had a remark?
I wanted to remark one thing, even though you're actually disagreeing with you in one thing. You said that you shouldn't use like show and ask in property annotation and so on. And the thing is that for many people who are using Semantic MediaWiki, this is one of the most powerful things they ever had in order to publish websites. And they often don't have access to a proper server. They have a wiki installed, they have maybe a Semantic MediaWiki, and they can do things like this. Like the Familypedia people are using a Wikia wiki, which is already pre-installed, and then they're adding all these things because they actually do not have the possibility to add new PHP code to the site, or not that easy as writing this. So I think that yes, it should be discouraged. I agree with that. But in some cases, it could be the first step towards creating more powerful pages and to have an easy and actually quite powerful way to do stuff that you otherwise wouldn't be able to do, and that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, when I say don't do that, I just mean don't come to us afterwards if it breaks your wiki. We can't, I mean, the reason, of course, this is powerful. This is too incomplete, yes. You can do any computation you want by this mechanism, even though performing one computation step means that somebody has to open the page for editing and press save with a non-empty edit. But this is not, yeah, it's powerful, I agree with that. I don't agree that Familypedia people cannot get PHP code on their site. In fact, Wikia would probably be happy to get rid of this mess. Because it's also stressing their service. We have talk from Wikia tomorrow. Maybe we can learn a bit more about their issues with that. Yes, but still, I think it's a good advice if people don't know what they are doing to tell them don't do it. But yeah, just as a default advice. There are exceptions. Okay, I think we take the rest of the discussion to the coffee and to all discussions later on. Just a general remark, as I said, this should also be a developer's day, so maybe we can also break out into some rooms because not all tutorials might be interesting to everybody. And it might be nice to have some time and space for discussions. There is another room, so this is always an option as well. So thanks a lot. So bad here if you know the idea. So this asks for capitals, for things that have capitals which have a population that is less than 500,000. So countries with small capital cities, I would say, is this query. And you can abbreviate this, so we have tried to make this a bit nicer in this case, where you have only like a chain of properties, has capital followed by has population, should lead to a value of smaller 500,000. You can do that with the little dot here and just chain it directly. So this is quite readable, I think. And again, you can easily actually think of queries now in this graphical way. You have some result you want to get, and you state things about this result. You state it should have a capital which is unknown, but has a population